Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Joshua White with the Stimson Center, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the New America Foundation for this panel. It's a real pleasure to be here. As many of you probably know, New America has really been at the forefront over the last several years in discussing changes, particularly in the sort of Islamic political landscape in South Asia. And very pleased that they've taken the initiative today to invite Arif Jamal to launch his new book and to share, I'm sure it will be just a small fraction of his many insights on Lashkar-e-Taiba and the affiliated movement. So we're very pleased to have him here today. Also joining us today is Dr. Mohammed Taqi to my right, who's going to be providing some commentary about sort of the wider Islamic political landscape. Many of you know him for being a prolific writer for the Daily Times in Pakistan and one of the real outsized Twitter personalities who regularly comments on what's happening in Pakistan, Afghanistan, and the wider region. So the way we're going to structure this afternoon is I'm going to ask Arif to present for about 15 minutes, and then ask Dr. Taqi to respond for about 15 minutes, and then I'll use my prerogative as the moderator to present a few questions, and then we'll open it up to what I'm sure will be a very lively and interesting debate, discussion, Q&A. So that's where we're going today, and with that, I'd like to turn it over to Arif to share some initial thoughts about his book, and then we'll get the discussion going from there.
Thank you very much. I think I'll go there. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming, and I thank New America Foundation for hosting me here, and also Josh White and Dr. Taqi for coming along. I will be briefly talking about first the relationship between Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jamaat-ud-Dawa and their global organization, and then I will be talking about their relationship with the Pakistani state or Pakistan Army. My book gives a very rich and detailed context for the birth of this group, and those who are really interested, they can read the book. Jamaat-ud-Dawa was founded in August 1987 in Lahore by the remnants of Juhayman's Ikhwan, the group which rebelled against the House of Saud in 1979 and occupied Mecca, the Kaaba for several days. This group was very global in perspective and membership, because people had been coming to Mecca, or all Muslims go to Mecca in their lifetimes, and that is where they were recruited in the group. But after the Saudis crushed that group, the remnants spread around the world, and many of them came to take part in Afghan Jihad in 1980, the year after the Mecca rebellion. However, they founded the group in 87, and they put a front of a Pakistani group led by Hafiz Said. At that time, Hafiz Said's status in the group was just that of a mudir. It's kind of office manager. It's not a very elevated status. From the very beginning, the group Jamaat-ud-Dawa had at that time named Markaz Dawat wal Irshad, that is MDI. MDI set up several departments, and one of those departments was Lashkar-e-Taiba. Lashkar-e-Taiba was meant to wage jihad just in Kashmir. They did not have the mandate to wage jihad in rest of the world. For rest of the world, Markaz Dawat wal Irshad, which was the predecessor of Jamaatul Dawa, created the Department of International Jihad, which was headed by Mahmoud Bahazik, who was mostly known as Abu Abdul Aziz Barbarossa. Abu Abdul Aziz was and is actually, he is still alive and living in Saudi Arabia, is the most dynamic jihadist I have come across. And he has done more to spread jihadist infrastructure in the world than anybody else. Mahmoud Bahazik headed the Department of International Jihad, and he went out to wage jihad in several countries. He fought in Afghanistan personally. He went to Philippines and fought in southern Philippines, and he went to many other countries and physically took part in jihad. In 1972, he set up a sub-department of Department of International Jihad, Muslim forces in Bosnia. The Bosnian Jihad was fought under the name of Muslim forces, but it was an entirely 100% Jamaatul Dawa operation. A lot of experts in here and elsewhere give credit to Al-Qaeda for that jihad, but actually the role of Al-Qaeda in the Bosnian jihad was very limited. A few people from Al-Qaeda did participate, but they were under the command of Mahmoud Bahazik. The Johannes Ikhwan set up several affiliates all over the world to coordinate international jihadist activities, and Markaz Dawat wal Irshad in Pakistan was kind of the center for all those jihadist groups in the world. For example, Markaz Dawat wal Irshad sent aid and fighters in Chechnya, in Tajikistan, in Uzbekistan, in Maldives, and they have set up units in some 100 countries. And I have identified dozens of them. They, in all over the world, they work under different names. The idea is that even if you crush Jamaatul Dawa today in Pakistan, which is not easy, the party will survive. Now, briefly, I will now touch upon the relationship between Pakistani state and Jamaatul Dawa. Markaz Dawat wal Irshad was set up in August 87. However, there is very little evidence of ISI support to Markaz Dawat wal Irshad till 1991. Yes, Pakistani state tolerated the group, but then they were tolerating every jihadist group at that time. In 1991, the ISI started supporting the Pakistani group, which was headed by Hafiz Saeed, to take over the command of the group so that they can push the group into Kashmir, where they had already started jihad. Between 1991 and 93, there was a huge struggle, power struggle within the group, and Hafiz Saeed supported with the resources and support from the ISI and took over command in practically in 1994, and the real Amir of Markaz Dawat wal Irshad, who was a Pakistani alim, Allama Rashidi, he was sidelined, but most of his followers, his group, and Arabs were sidelined. Rashidi died in 96, and then Hafiz Said took the command fully. That from that time onward, ISI has been controlling the group very, very closely. And the only objective for the ISI or for the Pakistani military is to wage jihad in Kashmir and some in India. Pakistani military does not have a global jihadist agenda, but it does have an Indian-centric jihadist agenda. But the problem is when they tolerate such groups, these groups usually want to do more than what the ISI mandate is. And the ISI pays the price of tolerating them and letting them do their jihadist work. The ISI or Pakistani military does not pay fully, as a lot of commentators say. They pay only as much as is required to wage jihad in Kashmir. For other operations in the world or even in Pakistan, JUD raises its own funds, and now it has become a real big group. I have calculated that it has trained something like between 300,000 to 500,000 people. When I say trained, it means that these people have undergone basic 21-day training. Now, this is a very scary figure, and most people would be skeptical. Let me give you a few examples to say that the figure is not all that unreal. Their biggest mass training camp, which is Kara, it was set up in 1992 approximately, and since then it has been giving training to approximately 200 men every week. At one time, there are 600 boys taking training at one center. And at one time, they had 4 big training camps in Pakistan and Pakistani Kashmir. Jamaat-ud-Dawa is not just a jihadi group, as we understand. It is a group which wants to run a modern state. It has recruited from all walks of life. Wherever you go in Pakistan, you will find that Jamaat-ud-Dawa members are present in that department. They are in the army, they are in the police, they are in the intelligence agencies, they are in customs, they are among doctors, they are among engineers, they are among all sorts of experts. Jamaat-ud-Dawa holds annual doctors convention, for example, and they gather something like 600 doctors, medical doctors. And they are not ordinary PCPs. Many of them are the leading doctors in Pakistan, urologists, cardiologists, ophthalmologists. They have engineers. One of the strongest Jamaat-ud-Dawa unit is in the Lahore's University of Engineering and Technology, where Hafiz Said used to teach Islamic studies. And the members graduate. They are not sent for jihad. They are asked to join government jobs, and many of these engineers have joined Pakistan's nuclear establishment. That I have shown in the book. I have given some names also. Then they have units in the ordinary universities. They graduate and they don't go to jihad. They go to other professions, and they do missionary work. At one time, I think not more than 2,000 boys are engaged in practical armed jihad. every time I spoke to JUD leaders, they insisted one point, that they are not a jihadi group as such. They are training themselves to run a modern state, and their voice will be able to take over every job a state does when they take over power in any country. This is the Jamaat-ud-Dawa Central, and then they have affiliates all over the world, and all those groups in the rest of the world, they are also evolving in the same manner. I think I will stop here and I think cover the rest in the question and answer session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Josh. Thank you, New America, and thank you everyone for coming. Initially, no financial disclosure and no association disclosure views are my own. The breaking news today was the appointment of the ISI director in Pakistan, and General Rizwan Akhtar has been appointed, and there's a nice chapter in the book which says the wholly owned subsidy of the ISI, Jamaat-ud-Dawa. So I guess a lot of you will be asking what happens next. I was sitting in the back room and I saw a little plaque from some years ago where another ISI director had taken over, and there was a lot of goodwill and enthusiasm about that particular ISI director taking over because he had trained in US just like General Akhtar has done. That was General Kiani, and that was back in 2006 or something like that. So we'll have to see how that pans out. I want to segue quickly into the numbers that Arif talked about. The camp al-Qara has been producing these hundreds and thousands of people, and at this point, maybe 500,000 Jamaat-ud-Dawa members are under arms. We saw in Islamabad over the last 6 weeks that less than 20,000 people who are unarmed, untrained, could bring the Pakistani government to a practical standstill. If a jihadi organization decided to bring any Pakistani city to a standstill like this, for example, Lahore, where next to Lahore is Murid Ke, the headquarters of Jamaat-ud-Dawa, I think it will be a very tough situation. So one has to think really long and hard about what the motives of this particular organization are. And like Arif said, LET is one of the brand names. You know, if General Motor was the enterprise, I would say this is the Chevy of General Motors. That's kind of what it is. You know, they make many other models. They have a Cadillac of Jihad also, which is their international jihadist organization. So the idea is bigger and much older than some of the other jihadist groups that have been out there in the market. And by design and by default, individuals and governments and organizations have been setting analysts and counterterrorism experts on a wild goose chase, where things which were done by the Jamaat-ud-Dawa were actually put into the Al-Qaeda basket to make things relatively easier and simpler for people to assimilate and not worry that much about it. The gentleman that he mentioned, Mahmoud Bahaziq, he was the guy who actually led the Bosnian Jihad in 1992, and he's called Barbarossa for a reason. He patterned himself after the Ottoman Admiral Khairuddin Barbarossa. And one of the Jamaat-ud-Dawa strategies is to encircle India and the Indian and Pacific Oceans, kind of a reverse of the string of pearls analogy that the Chinese use, something along those lines, starting from the Maldives all the way up to the Philippines. And they have a very interesting name from which is an associated group, MILF, M-I-L-F, the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. So I wish somebody brought it to their attention that it might be something that has to be changed. So it is a organization which is huge, which has cut its ideological teeth much before any other organization has done, and it has worldwide reach. Hafiz Saeed has visited United States, 7 states, including my state, Florida. He has visited UK. Mahmoud Bahazik has been all over the world. And unfortunately, the West and the US still see it as a Pakistani and an Indian problem. For India, it could actually be an existential problem. But the way things are unraveling in the larger Middle East, one has to look at the ideology of Jamaat-ud-Dawa as a pioneer Salafi group in Pakistan to think what kind of threat it can pose to the world at large, not just India. So it is not going to be a regional India, Afghanistan, Pakistan problem. And sometimes groups like JUD like to tactically underplay their strengths and objectives. They do not want to pick unnecessary battles at unnecessary time. I was talking earlier that back in the day, the Marxist dictum used to be that you don't want a premature revolution. You want to do it at the right time. So whenever the time is right, things might happen that people may or may not like. The question is whether the Pakistani state can rein these guys in, whether the new ISI chief and his outfit, the Pakistani army, whatever relationship they may or may not have, are they in a position, I'm not here to say whether they actually control them or not. I've written an extensive review of the book. You can Google it and read it, and definitely read the book. But is that going to be something that we should look forward to? Arif has addressed that from primary source, from the Pakistani Army's writing, how they look at some of these groups. The groups which attack Pakistan only, they're the ones who are to be tackled primarily and with the state might and with the immediate urgency. Then there are groups which attack both Pakistan and US and India, for example. Those are dealt with on a case-by-case basis. And depending upon what kind of carrot or what kind of stick is dangled from the DC area, action may take place. It may take almost a decade, just like we saw in the case of Haqqani Network. But it did happen a little bit, maybe wishy-washy, maybe not as effective, but it does. And then there are groups which do not attack Pakistan. And Jamaat-ud-Dawa is classified as one of those groups which has not conducted operations inside Pakistan. Even the fundamental Salafi creed of takfir is not professed openly by Jamaat-ud-Dawa. Takfir meaning apostatizing the other Muslims to the extent that they are considered liable to murder. This is something that JUD does not do openly. But if you read the book carefully, you would see that it has actually practiced takfir in the Indian Kashmir, where it attacked Sufi shrines such as the famous Charar Sharif shrine, Shah Nuruddin Wali's shrine, and a couple of other major Sufi shrines. So it is not that the ideology is not there. It is probably a tactical maneuver, and at times they are presented as a counterweight to the unruly Deobandi militant groups which are getting out of the Pakistani state's hand or attacking, say for example, the GHQ. The point is that JUD actually gained battlefield experience initially with some of those Deobandi groups, such as the Haqqani Network. The first battlefield experience that Zakiur Rahman Lakhvi got was in the town of Arghun in Paktika. This is the same town that was bombed 3 months back, right around the Eid time, when people were shopping and about 80 people died there. This is exactly the same time where Jalaluddin Haqqani started his own original campaign back in the August of 1975. So there has been some cross-pollination, but there is a very slight doctrinal difference that this book very keenly highlights between the Salafism and Wahhabism, and where that has practical relevance to what the policymakers and counterterrorism experts have to do is where exactly do these Salafis and Wahhabis differ. for all practical purposes, the Salafi groups like Jamaat-ud-Dawa, they are not much different than the Wahhabi or the Deobandi organizations, but they take it all the way back to the time of the first two caliphs. And this is the pristine Islam that they want to reproduce. This is the caliphate that they want to reproduce. And when they object to the Deobandis or Wahhabis, even in case of, for example, the Saudi state, they think of them as heretics. And therein lies the rub, that we look at many things from the perspective of whether the ISI can or cannot control these groups. Maybe they can, maybe they cannot. But what this book does is it actually looks at JUD from its own individual perspective, its ideology, and not the ISI prism and the ISI blinders. I think that is the strength of the book. This is very important, and I think one of the most important aspects that Arif has highlighted is the original primary source work called Jihad in the Present Times, which highlights 8 points, some of which actually have a bit of an overlap, and at the expense of maybe boring you with that, I'll just have to read those out to you. The points 1, 4, 5, and 6 are sort of interrelated, so I would go through that. Ending the persecution of Muslims anywhere, everywhere. Help the weak and oppressed Muslims anywhere and everywhere. Seek revenge for the murder of a Muslim by a non-Muslim. And here the key is the revenge. The diyat or blood money, as was done in the case of the spy guy caught in Pakistan, that is something which was not acceptable to people like JUD. So it has to be an eye for an eye. And then punish those who violate the oaths or agreements with the Muslim governments. So that's a very interesting phenomenon that they develop. And then ultimate goal, like he mentioned, is establishing not just a small fortress somewhere, but an actual caliphate, a state, replicating the state of Medina. But they don't go back all the way, although they claim going back to the times of the Prophet. They actually stop short of that, and they move towards the time of the first two caliphs. They don't even consider within the Islamic context, the 4 rightly guided caliphs are supposed to be, the revered ones, but they discount the last 2, because that is considered the time of strife, and they look at the prime of Islam as the expansion of the empire in the time of first 2 caliphs. And one of the points related to that is the recapturing of those lands which were once under Muslim domination, which includes Spain and India. So that's the gist of the JUD ideology. Now, why is it problematic to have groups like these as tools of foreign policy persecution? And I would say that since the 2001, the JUD had a very clear anti-US agenda. It came out with a clear-cut fatwa, a decree from its Darul Ifta, which is the house that issues decrees in support of Osama bin Laden, in support of the Taliban in Afghanistan, despite their doctrinal differences with the Deobandi Taliban and relative differences with the Osama bin Laden. And despite that, they were well tolerated by the Pakistani security establishment. And not only that, they were given battlefield access. And as the war in Afghanistan, and I'm talking from after October 2001, it started picking up, the Indian presence in Afghanistan was used as a pretext, where these groups which had consorted before, and JUD back in the first post-Soviet Afghanistan war, it had a huge presence in the northeastern Afghan states of Nuristan and Kunar, which were under Salafi influence, and they actually had established a Salafi state under the leadership of a guy called Jamilur Rahman. And those camps were inherited by JUD after the collapse of the Mujahideen regime, and they maintained it. Taliban kicked them out, but then they had access to that. So once again, these groups were brought into contact with the Deobandi groups like the Haqqani Network, and as late as the swearing in of Indian Prime Minister Modi, where the Indian consulate in Herat was attacked, the blame was again laid at the door of JUD, and most likely in conjunction, the access was provided by one of the Deobandi groups. So they are not necessarily mutually exclusive. And the problem arises when the states use these groups and they spin out of their control. We all know that. It has happened before. The Pakistani security establishment has used both secular and doctrinal, ideological jihadist groups in Kashmir. Jammu Kashmir Liberation Front, whose original founder, one of the original founders, came from my hometown of Peshawar. That spun out of Pakistan's control. Another layer was created. The Afghan Mujahideen, the first 7 parties, they spun out of the control, and another layer was created. It does happen. It has happened with the Saudis also. In the early 20th century, the Saudi Ikhwan rebellion against the House of Saud was a prime example of why there can't be 2 centers of power, because within the Wahhabist and Salafist doctrine, and that is right from the text of Abdullah ibn Wahhab, that there can be nothing but one ruler, one authority, one mosque. That is the crux of the Salafi creed, and this is where things become more relevant today. After 1979, to be precise, November 20th, 1979, which was the Makkah rebellion, that was Muharram 1st, the year 1400 in the Islamic calendar. So this millenarian tendency had existed in the Saudi Salafis, and Juhayman al-Utaybi, who was one of the key ideologues, he, along with the promised Messiah, he took over the holy mosque in Kaaba. And as Arif mentioned, some of those people were captured and killed, including Utaybi, but a lot of them survived. And JUD happens to be a direct extension of that creed. And now what we are reading today is that ISIS, in their core curriculum, is teaching what? The letters of Juhayman al-Utaybi and the text from, original text from Abdullah ibn Wahhab. So I'll just quickly stop here, that there's so much in this book which is relevant to what is happening today, and why it is not just a regional problem. Presence in 52 countries, going on from Maldives all the way to Philippines, Australia, US. You remember the paintball jihadist plot here in Virginia. The reach is there. 3 or 7 of the brothers of Hafiz Saeed and one of his comrades, they were imams in US, including in Boston. How? Why? Who's dropping the ball? Where? Are we being taken for a ride by an English-speaking, cigar-smoking, scotch-drinking general somewhere who might be saying something in a language that we don't understand? Is there a problem? I think we need to really introspect. So that's my spiel for today. Do buy the book. Highly recommend it. If you want to read my review, you can look it up on the Google. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you both for very provocative comments, and it leaves me with this image of a Scotch drinking general in a Chevy driving somewhere in South Asia. What I'd like to do is open up by asking Arif a couple of questions that take what is a very rich book full of historical material and ask him to think out a little bit toward the future in 2 areas that I think are areas in which he's highly qualified to do so, and I think there's also interest by those of us who think about this movement in terms of what it means for policy decisions. In the first place, the book traces in some very interesting detail the early leadership struggles of this movement and the way in which Hafiz Saeed eventually comes to lead the movement. And so I wanted to ask Arif if he could look to the future and imagine what scenarios, what situations, what events might precipitate either a leadership change or some fragmentation of leadership within the broader movement, which I think he quite correctly identifies as, or labels as MDI-JUD, but which we would commonly call Lashkar-e-Taiba. And I think this is important because there's been a lot of speculation here in Washington about whether there might be parts of this movement that take on a different agenda than the core. So the first question is, what would it take to see that happen? The second question has to do with the broader premise of the book, which is that this is not a movement that is localized to Pakistan and India, but one that has deep roots in the Gulf and has broadened out throughout the world, from the UK to Bangladesh, the United States, and elsewhere. And it's very interesting how the book traces this sort of globalization of the movement, looking at Chechnya and other places. But it strikes me as I read it that however dispersed the group may be, and however broad its recruiting network might be, the target set has actually been rather consistently narrow, with the exception of some of the group's early engagements in Afghanistan, perhaps some activity in the Maldives, a foiled plot in Copenhagen. By and large, this is a group that seems to care about going after Indians, and that the sort of anywhere, everywhere motif broadly applies to Indian targets. So again, the question, looking to the future, is this a movement that may eventually truly broaden that sense of who needs to be targeted? And what would it take to see that change come about in the group, given such a long history focusing on India as a state and as a people group that need to be challenged in South Asia and more widely? So I'll ask Arif to address those questions, and then I'm going to open the floor to your questions.
I think people can hear okay. First, the MDI and JUD people are very well trained in the doctrines, and their belief system is such that once you join the group, once you go through 21-day training, where actually you don't learn much of using Kalashnikov, but the ideological doctrines, and during those 21 days, you basically learn or accept to kill and die in the name of Islam. And once you undergo that training, I see that it's almost impossible for anybody to leave the group. There have been some groups, half a dozen people leaving or being pushed out of the group, but the group has remained very solidly intact. And I don't see, even if you eliminate the entire JUD leadership today, the group is likely to stay united. And I don't see, honestly, any fragmentation happening in this group particularly. Also, the affiliates work in such a way that if you eliminate one group, the others will survive, because you don't know who they are working under which name and where. Even in Pakistan, let me give you an example. Jamaat-ud-Dawa runs something like 1,000 so-called secular schools. As I said, they want to run a modern state, not madrasa-led state. And they own only 200 schools, which are named as Ad-Dawa system of schools. Ad-Dawa system of schools only, the enrollment in the Ad-Dawa schools is almost 50,000. 50,000, and there are 800 other schools which we don't know under which names they are working. The second point was
The targeting and how they're a global movement, but their targets have seemed to be rather narrow
Yes.
and constrained.
Actually, Lashkar-e-Taiba became famous or known because over these years, Lashkar-e-Taiba was doing jihad in India, and only Indian media was talking about it. The rest of the world, unfortunately, ignored the group, and whenever the group was involved in any jihad, for example, in Bosnia, the world unfortunately gave credit to Al-Qaeda. As I said, I have shown in the book that the Bosnian jihad was an Jamaat-ud-Dawa jihad, not an Al-Qaeda jihad. But the world gave credit to Al-Qaeda. That is why we don't know much about their jihad in Bosnia, in Chechnya, in Tajikistan, in Philippines, for example. We don't know that in Sudan they are working under which name. Jamaat-ud-Dawa is very much present in Afghanistan, in Kunar and Nuristan along the Pakistan border. They are virtually under their control. So we don't know much about their global activities, and that is this is my first attempt to show that. Let me give you one example. When Dr. Taki was talking about their doctrines, one of the doctrines of Jamaat-ud-Dawa is that all Muslims should wage jihad to take back the lands which were once occupied by Muslims. They have, I think, 8 or 10 doctrines to wage jihad, to justify jihad. And America, according to their doctrine, was once occupied by the Muslims. There is an article which shows that at one point Muslims had come here to rule, although they could not, but they did come here. Since they came, now it's duty for Jamaat-ud-Dawa to take back this land for Muslims. I can see the faces, but that is what their doctrine says. And there's so many other very, very interesting doctrines that we all need to study.
Can I quickly add? I'll just quickly add to this that sort of like the Trotskyite notion of a perpetual revolution or something along those lines. You start with 1979. You have the Juhayman's Ikhwan, and right before that, in 1978, we had the Saur Revolution in Afghanistan. And the remnants of Juhayman's Ikhwan, including Bahazik, were moving to Afghanistan, and they were waging war there. So this is the late 20th century first major jihad where the Salafis are getting involved. Then from that point on, they moved 1992 to Bosnia. From 1992 major jihad in Bosnia, they moved to Chechnya, 94-96. They are working. This is JUD working with Shamil Basayev. In Chechnya, and logistic support or whether actual participation, they're there. Again in 1996, they are back in Afghanistan. Then 2001 onwards, they're in Afghanistan. And some of the areas that we talk about, the Nuristan and Kunar, which are the areas under the Salafi control, they also happen to be the areas where Pakistan claims that the TTP, the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan leadership is there. I'm not insinuating anything, but the question is whether those areas which are out of the Afghan government's control, is there any sort of consorting going on between the Tehreek-e-Taliban and JUD in those particular areas? Because Nuristan in particular and they have been the hub of the JUD activity. And then the fundamental, as one of the Taliban used to say, that you have the watch, but we got the time. That is something that they're patient people. There's very little impatience, waiting for the right time. And if you look at it, incrementally it has been becoming more sinister, more violent, and the culmination now is in the form of Iraq and Syria. The ISIS is the prime Salafi example that we have, and the problem is it's not a question of when, it's not a question of if, but when. And Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, I think in my own view, those would be the two two countries which could potentially be hit by a very significant rift between the former Salafi Wahhabi proxies and the state itself.
I would just say I saw in the news that a JUD spokesman in Pakistan came out with a very forceful statement against ISIS or ISIL or whatever we're calling it today. Did that statement surprise you, or did it not surprise you?
No, that doesn't surprise me. But it's too early to see how things will evolve in the coming months and years. Actually, how I see is that most of the jihadist forces in South Asia and Central Asia, particularly in Afghanistan, will coalesce. What we have seen in the last 10 years is that the Deobandis, which were initially not Takfiris, have become Takfiris, and the Takfiris have become more radical, and the ideological difference between Taliban, who were Deobandis, and the Salafis is narrowing. Fazlullah, who heads the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, is ideologically a lot closer to Hafiz Saeed than to Taliban in Afghanistan. So I see a lot of forces coalescing, and the same trend will probably be happening in the Middle East. But one thing is also sure, that there are a lot of Juhayman Ikhwan who are joining the ISIS in the Middle East. Now how do they handle the situation in the Middle East? We don't know. It's too early to foresee. But probably there may be two caliphates, or maybe there may be one caliphate. Well, in history we have seen two caliphates coexisting very peacefully in the Middle East and in South Asia. We don't know how this situation will evolve. But the scary thing is that I see a caliphate in South Asia coming in next few years. Pakistan can implode anytime, and the only jihadist group which is ready to take over is JUD.
On that optimistic note, I would like to open the floor to questions. We do have a microphone, and I'm going to ask that you ask a question, and that it be one question, and that it not be a statement. And with that, we'll start with the woman here in the striped shirt.
My name is Benazir Shah. I'm with Newsweek Pakistan. In your book, you write about how Hafiz Saeed had a personal relationship with Osama bin Laden. They were constantly in contact when he was in Pakistan. How has that relationship between Jamaat-ud-Dawa and Al-Qaeda changed ever since OBL was killed, since both these groups are Salafi groups?
Let me remind you that Jamaat-ud-Dawa, or MDI, was founded by Juhayman's Ikhwan remnants. Now, Juhayman's Ikhwan was the first real international global jihadist group, not only in its membership but also in its vision. Juhayman's Ikhwan did not want to occupy just Saudi Arabia, but they had a global agenda, because they thought Mahdi had come and this is the time to take over the whole world. That is what the Muslims believe, Sunni Muslims believe. Now, that belief system has been borrowed by the JUD. However, Al-Qaeda or Osama bin Laden was not against Saudi monarchy in the early years. Osama bin Laden and some of his colleagues turned against the Saudis in mid-1990s. However, there were some remnants of Juhayman Ikhwan in the Al-Qaeda or Osama bin Laden group. So there also we see the two groups ideologically coalescing. The new statement of Al-Zawahiri shows, we don't have much of evidence, but it shows that Al-Qaeda or whatever is left of Al-Qaeda is coming further closer to JUD. And I see them cooperating more and more in South Asia. Now, the most important thing in Ayman al-Zawahiri's statement for me is that the countries he mentions, for example, Myanmar, Bangladesh, they are the countries where JUD is heavily present after India and Pakistan and Afghanistan. So that is very significant. Why he chose Bangladesh and Burma to mention? I think it's because of the two groups' cooperation somewhere.
Thank you very much. Hassan Abbas, National Defense University. Congratulations, Arif. I look forward to reading the book very soon. I have two questions. I promise that those will be very brief, Josh. First is about, do you think Lashkar-e-Taiba and JUD can convert into a political party at some stage? When will they make that decision? And what do you think will be the response? Where will they place themselves in reference to Jamaat-e-Islami, Jamaat-e-Ulama-Islam, and so many other religious parties? Where will they develop their coalition or alliances, if you think? And second is, as a teacher, I would say, when I have to teach my students, I always say, look for credible sources. Tell us something more about the sources of your book. Is it based upon interviews? And I know of your extensive journalistic background and linkages. Who are the people you interviewed? Which are the books, their publications? So what are the major 4 or 5 sources of all that you're telling us? Thank you.
First of all, I don't think it will ever become a political party in the sense even Jamaat-e-Islami of Pakistan is. Although after 9/11 terrorist attacks, they started posing as a political religious party, but I don't think they will ever be even like Jamaat-e-Islami, which is in my view a terrorist party. Second, about sources, I have my sources include in-house publications, a lot of interviews. Hafiz Said, I have interviewed Hafiz Said dozens of times, and I have published dozens of interviews with Hafiz Said in question and answer form in Pakistan. I think I was the first journalist who interviewed him and published in English in 1976 or 7. And that was when he was not really Hafiz Said. And when he learned that some English newspaper person is coming to him, he was really overawed. And I have been to all their training camps, lived there for days. It was very difficult. If you ask me to do again, I won't be able to do that. But then again, it was my passion to work on them. So I have thousands of interviews, very closely watched them evolve into what they are in last 20 years.
If I could just ask a follow-up question, because I thought Hassan's point was very interesting. Why would this movement, why would Jamaat al-Dawa not want to enter the political process? They have joined street movements with the Defy Pakistan Council in engaging on public issues. They have a broad-based network that involves both a platform on a number of public issues, plus an extensive service delivery component, which could make them and could provide the framework for for the sorts of things that successful political parties do. What do you think would be the logic within the party for rejecting that move into the political space?
Actually, primarily it would be because of the doctrinal reason. The doctrine is that you cannot even impose the Quranic laws through parliament, because if the Parliament of Pakistan says Quran is the only law in Pakistan, even that is not acceptable to them, because it's the Parliament's law word which is imposing Quran in Pakistan. That is not acceptable, and they say it has to be the Amir, the Amirul Mu'minin, who has to say Quran is the law.
I'll just going back to that, why they would not it would be very hard. Hafiz Saeed actually got the battlefield experience along with Osama bin Laden in the Battle of Jaji in the Loya Pakhtia region in 1986-87. Osama was so impressed with him, he gave him actually his jeep. I don't think that we have seen many Al-Qaeda actually turn into political parties. And then the fundamental doctrinal issue is, like he says, Amir means doing something by order. If you go to the Arabic root word Amr, which is by decree, there's very little political process involved in that. And the experiment with the DPC, the Difai Pakistan Council, which was actually a conglomerate of various different ideological parties and some groups in Pakistan, which was propped up against the previous Pakistan People's Party government, was an engineered project basically to bring street pressure upon the Pakistan People's Party to acquiesce to certain demands that the Pakistani security establishment had. So it was not truly an evolutionary process in the sense of a political party evolving, such as even Jamaat-e-Islami, which had a strong ideologic doctrinal base, membership base. This is the party which is, Jamaat-ud-Dawa is an active jihadist group, quite unlike, yes, I tend to agree with Arif that Jamaat-e-Islami has active terrorism acts under its belt right from 1979 onwards. But for JUD to move towards a mainstream political party would mean that everyone in Pakistan actually subscribed to their Salafist creed, and that is where the problem with the Salafist and Wahhabist creed is. The Takfirism excludes anyone and everyone, and even within their own groups they have such fundamental disagreements that it's such a straight line that mainstream Pakistanis would find it really hard to actually subscribe to the thought process. We saw that in Saudi Arabia, where even people like the chief cleric bin Baz actually took on the Saudi monarchy. And then we have the Salafi arch ideologue Albani, who basically did takfir or apostatized even the Wahhabists. So you have a group which is exclusivist within the exclusivists, and for them to go out and become mainstream, I don't think that I would see that happen in my lifetime. It probably would happen in certain pockets somewhere, and there is an actual push. There is a book out there by a scholar, Humaira Iqtidar, which talks about Jamaat-ud-Dawa and Jamaat-Islami actually becoming the secularizing influences on the Pakistani society. God knows how actually you go about doing something like that, but worth actually checking that out.
Next question there, please.
My name is Suleri. I'm from the Embassy of Pakistan. Now, one question. You talked about the 21 days course that takes place in Jamaat-ud-Dawa, and it appears to be a very well-crafted course which converts a person within 21 days from someone who... do you hear me, sir? No, okay, all right. You talked about the 21 days course that takes place at Jamaat-ud-Dawa's headquarters, which converts a person from the one who had some other ideas to some radical ideas within 21 days. So it has to be a well-crafted course. Do you have any access to what kind of that literature is? Why? Because in your own words, the people who are joining are from different walks of life, doctors, engineers, computers, and scientists, etc. So what is there in that it converts very well-read and educated people into something different within 21 days?
Yes, I have a very clear idea about that. Before 9/11 terrorist attacks, everyone could freely go to those camps. There was no bar. You see, the problem is for the world they are terrorists, but for Jamaat-ud-Dawa people they are not. They think what they are doing is part of their religion, that they are doing it as part of their religious duties. So they have nothing to hide, and they never hid that, and they don't hide it even now. Even now they take any journalist, any researcher to their camps and show them what they are doing. Now the problem is that foreign journalists are suspected sometimes. That's why there are problems. But otherwise, their vision is very clear. In those days, you see, when they recruit somebody, there is a time. The person who is recruiting somebody, he teaches him something, and then he shows something. But when he goes to a training camp, when somebody who has nothing to look forward to in life, that is what the mass of JUD people are. When he holds the Kalashnikov, he feels empowered. And that empowerment makes him a lifelong follower. The power Kalashnikov gives to everybody there in the camp, I have seen people changing in over 3 days, drastically changed. And then after 21 days, they have read some parts of Quran and some hadiths which are suitable for them. And then they are not abandoned. After 21 days, they are taken to their local village, a city, a neighborhood units, and there they are further trained. So that is how, and you know, Jamaat Dawa holds thousands, or maybe tens of thousands of training camps and meetings in 1 year in Pakistan. That's amazing. They're always under training. They're always under training and missionary work. Hafiz Said did not sleep in his bedroom for years and years and years. He used to sleep in his van because he was traveling from Karachi to Peshawar, and he is giving a lecture in Karachi. Then he's traveling in the van. After 2 hours to another unit, he's giving a lecture, and that is many of them did.
I'd just like to jump in because I think it's a very interesting comment. And you've been watching this movement for a while. Can you speak a little bit to the socioeconomic basis of the people who you believe are joining? I mean, there's one view that said, well, look, they have outreach to doctors and lawyers, and journalists and engineers. That's certainly a middle or upper middle class kind of socioeconomic profile. We read other things that say, well, these are the poor, impressionable, destitute, who have nothing to look forward to until they hold that Kalashnikov in their hand. What have you seen in terms of the kind of people who join the movement, and has it changed since the 1990s?
In the beginning, briefly, the Pakistani founders were madrasa trained or were affiliated with madrasas. Hafiz Said and Zafar Iqbal and Hafiz Makki, they are not madrasa trained, but they were teaching in madrasas. But other founding members, most of them were madrasa trained. But the Ahle Hadith did not allow them to use their madrasas, because Ahle Hadith in Pakistan were associated with the Saudi government, and the Saudi government did not like any of them, if they wanted funds from Saudi Arabia, to be associated with Juhayman's Ikhwan. Now what happened after that? They started recruiting from different walks of life, and they set up units, laborers unit, doctors unit, and they started recruiting from every walk of life, and they succeeded in most. However, most of the members were from the very poor, impoverished families who had really little in life. I have done a study with Christine Fair and Don Dressler on fighters. It's, I think, Fighters of Lashkar-e-Taiba. It's available on online, and that is the study where we have shown we used the published biographies of JUD martyrs, and you will see you will see their socio-economic background of those who died. But those who die are not exactly the representative of the group, because doctors, the JUD doesn't send doctors to fight because doctors are needed elsewhere. They don't send engineers to fight and die because they are needed elsewhere. So businessmen, there are a lot of businessmen in the group. They don't send them as a policy to fight, even when they want to.
Can I quickly add to this? Short courses are not unique to jihadist organizations. Military organizations do that. There's National Cadet Corps in Pakistan, for example. Pakistan Army used to run a short training course at Mangla at one point, OTS Mangla as it used to be called. From your own travel agent, you may know the Taste of Italy trip. You would go for a day or two or something, and the next time you may end up going for 10 days. This Dora-e-Amma, or the initial course, is an introductory course. There is about 8 or so more courses which they go through. But what I wanted to touch is at the broader milieu in which these people or the general Pakistani population is being primed. I'm a medical doctor. In the first 2 years of med school, I read anatomy, physiology, and biochemistry, so many other things. But 2 other subjects that were taught were Pakistan studies and Islamiyat. Now, what in the God's name you have to do with Islamiyat in a medical school? And that is the curriculum that is being fed to every Pakistani from day one. In this audience, it's a small world. I have 2 of my classmates from Pakistan Air Force School who know exactly the curriculum that we read. And our houses were divided in the school. We had Khalid House, Qasim House, Saladin House, and Iqbal House. And 3 of these are military men, and then there is Iqbal, who is actually the military ideologue. I'll read you one Farsi verse of Iqbal, which is very commonly used. Half of it is used, and it says, Har mulk mulki mast ke mulke khudai mast. Any land which is my Lord's land is my land. What they don't tell you is the first line that Iqbal said. This is the Tariq, that was another house in our school. Tariq bin Ziyad actually landing at Gibraltar, burning its boat, and everyone said, what are you doing? And what he said was, Khandidu dast khesh bashamshir burdu guft, har mulk mulki mast ke mulke khudai mast. He laughed, he took his hand to his sword and said, any country which is my Lord's country is my country. This is the ideology that you are actually grooming the Pakistani kids with. This is the doctors and engineers that you are grooming through Pakistani schooling system, secular schooling system. And it's a massacre of history that is taking place there. So I'll just stop short of that, and then from that point you introduce them to whatever Dora-e-Amma and Khasa, which is like a commando course.
I'll take a question here.
Hi, my name is Matt. You've taken a large view with JUD, but could you please comment on any similarities, differences, or convergence between the Haqqani network and LET?
Sorry, I didn't get the question.
The question was about any convergences between the Haqqani network and LET, or to unpack that relationship.
So far, we don't see that. But as I said, the jihadist forces in that region are coalescing, have been coalescing, and may further coalesce. I think that may come or may not come. But Haqqani network is basically for Afghanistan, and I think in the beginning, yes, they will coalesce. But if one group has to dominate, survive, it would be JUD. Haqqanis won't survive.
As far as Afghanistan goes, there has been a certain overlap in the Haqqani network and the JUD, and a lot of the operations conducted against the Indian interests in Afghanistan, which I mentioned, Herat Consulate. There was an Indian embassy bombing as well, in which the blame was laid actually at JUD and Haqqani network's doorstep. Haqqani network is fundamentally a Deobandi organization, and they come from the madrasa, which is about 40 miles from my hometown of Peshawar. But where there is operational need, there certainly is an overlap, and things, they can make things happen.
I believe there's a woman in the far back on this side.
Yep.
No, there's a woman in the far back.
Hello, My name is Khadija Kamar. Thank you for your discussion today. My question was regarding whether or not, back to your discussion previously on whether or not Hafiz Saeed was aiming towards political legitimacy. And I think that his statements in the past year and some of the interviews indicate that he's more publicly open about his position. Last year in the New York Times, he said, we need to create a political option for Kashmir instead of a militant option. So I was wondering why you think that LET's doctrinal evolution doesn't indicate that it could also have a political evolution. Because you said previously that you think the doctrine is so severe that they couldn't have some form of political vying for a political party. But I think their past has shown that they're doctrinally evolutionary and that doctrine is at the service of politics and not the other way around.
If I understood your question correctly, actually what I meant was it will not be a political party in the sense other parties are. JUD is trying to pose as a political party, but then they also say that their politics is Islam. I think it was basically a strategy to survive in the post 9/11 period when there was clamped down, whatever that meant at that time, on jihadist groups. Have I answered your question?
Let me just ask a quick follow-up, if I could. This is an organization, particularly if you speak about Lashkar-e-Taiba, that has focused very significantly on Kashmir, both in its rhetoric and its activities. How does the organization see its engagements in Kashmir today, as the political environment has certainly very dynamic in Jammu and Kashmir? From your reading of their current statements or literature, your observation, how has their view of their activities or their agenda or their approach changed over time with respect to Kashmir?
Theoretically, they have not moved from their initial positions on anything, and they say that tactically they have retreated a little. The Kashmir Jihad is fully funded by the ISI. Everybody knows this is not something secret anywhere in the world. And when they want to curb them, they curb them. After 9/11, there was a lot of pressure on Pakistan to curb these jihadist groups in Kashmir, and they did. Secondly, there was a fence between the two Kashmirs that created a lot of problems for Mujahideen. And the result was that they started sending their boys to India proper. What I have been trying to say and said in the book is that ISI, Pakistani military, has a very limited agenda, and that is Kashmir. But the jihadist group, all of them, have far bigger agenda, and tolerating those jihadist groups' agenda is what poses the real threat to the world.
There's a question. Yes.
Thank you, Josh, and panelist. I'm Ruhullah Osmani from Johns Hopkins Science. Very interestingly, being from South Asia, your discussion scared me a little bit of the future of South Asia, given the complexity of the GOD. And at the same time, we can see the footprint of the West, led by the US in Afghanistan, is being reduced. And the West and the US is encouraging a regional solution for Afghanistan and the South Asia. So with the threat you see from GOD, that you said the government of Pakistan is also unable to control them and they can overthrow government of Pakistan any day. So how you see that who in the region should lead these finding a solution or bring stability for South Asia as a whole, if you see Pakistan itself has a big threat, and that threat can go and expand to any country in South Asia. Afghanistan as an example. So how you see the future of that situation with the West having a limited footprint there?
Briefly, I don't think one single country can tackle this problem, Pakistan or United States or India. I think the whole world will have to seriously pool in resources and efforts to fight this threat. Because even if you eliminate JUD Central, the problem is still there. However, the real problem comes before that, and that is how to stop Pakistani state, in other words, Pakistan army, to use jihad as an instrument of its defense policy. And Pakistani military has used jihad as an instrument of its defense policy since 1947. It has never stopped doing that. How to stop that? Unless you stop that, you cannot really fully fight the jihadist group. But then you can't really stop fighting just because Pakistan is not doing enough. So we have to do that and remain optimist. At some stage we will win.
Question in the front.
Thank you very much. I'm Tariq Pervez from Pakistan. First of all, let me compliment you on writing on such an important topic. I'm just trying to be clear about the transformation of LET from a regional terrorist organization to a global terrorist organization. My perception was that it's probably regional. I would be interested, my question is whether there have been any attacks or any attempts to carry out terrorist acts by LET in the West. I'm not talking of Bosnia and Chechnya, those are two different, another dimension altogether. But I was just looking for some concrete evidence to...
In the West?
Whether there have been any specific incidents or attempts. Thank you.
Actually, first, the JUD or MDI did not become from a Pakistani group into a global group. Actually, it was vice versa. A global at an international group called Yemen's Ikhwan became a Pakistani group and then became international again. There is no incident where they succeeded as such, but after Bosnia they had planned to go to Italy. They had there are some hadiths which say that Muslims will conquer Ottoman Roman Empire, and after such they had planned to go into Italy to conquer Rome, because that is what they thought God asked them. In other places they had planned, like Lodi incident in Australia, they had planned but had not succeeded. And I think
the Virginia paintball group, the Virginia paintball group here.
Yes, here also they tried, but they did not succeed. Now, how Virginia group was actually cobbled up in London. The London branch of JUD introduced American jihadists and Hafiz Said in London, and then they planned there. I think no court documents show that. My book shows that how it was. The plan was made in London. The spiritual leader of American Jihad, Ali al-Tamimi, was in London with Hafiz Said, where they planned.
And some of the people, like the shoe bomber, for example, has gone through their training camps And in certain incidences, the plans were aborted, like the Yellen-Poston attack was planned but eventually not carried out by JUD, and the guy who was supposed to do it kind of got disillusioned with their tactical restraint.
Yes, but you see, that is where the JUD has become a supermarket of jihad. Anybody can go and get training and come back and start jihad. I would not say that if somebody gets trained from JUD, comes back and does jihad, that's not JUD agenda.
That's an important distinction.
Very good.
Sir in the back.
Tom Timberg, consultant, and actually this leads into my question, which is, what about dropouts? 500,000 people have gone through the training, but do we have, and a number of them have then gone on to careers or moved abroad or come back to the United States. How many of the people go through the course and then drop out or even are alienated by it?
Really, I don't have any numbers. Whatever I know is in the public domain from the newspapers. They don't really announce. When foreign trainees come to their camps, they don't announce. And that was not of much interest to me either at any time. There aren't many.
There's a woman here in the front.
Thank you. Your fascinating, excellent presentation. Jacqueline Rose here. You mentioned some, in passing, some claims being made that Muslims came to the U.S. and therefore it's the duty to go back and conquer the U.S. Could you expand on that in as much detail and as many places and groups that are claiming that as you can?
I've read only in one article, a long article on America, in one of the JUD publications, because their doctrine is that you have to fight jihad to take back Muslim lands. And they showed that at some point, I think 400 or 500 years ago, some Muslims did land in America, and they wanted to establish a Muslim rule here. How correct their historical sources are, I really don't know. But that is what they believe. So my knowledge is limited to their belief system.
My name is
please wait for the microphone.
with the Pakistani Spectator. And my question is, Mr. Naqvi, you said you are from Peshawar, and let's say that you lost your relatives in drone attack. Would you call that American-sponsored state terrorism? Similarly, let's say that you have relatives in Gaza, and you lost your relative where Israel killed 2,000 people just for a couple of its citizens. So would you call state-sponsored terrorism? And similarly, in India, there are 70,000 Kashmiri who have lost their lives. So is that state-sponsored terrorism, or it's a problem of Al-Dawa or these Islamic parties? And my question to you, sir, is this:
please.
One question to each.
No, please, just one question,
thanks.
sir. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
So the question is whether I would call, well, I have lost a lot of friends. No, just, well, let's just talk about personal experience. I lost 8 friends in one bombing about 2 furlongs from where I grew up in the city of Peshawar, in which the IG, the Inspector General of Police, Malik Saad, who was also a good friend, was lost. That bombing was carried out by the Taliban. So it is very close to my heart, what I talk about. And it is, the question is, which Arif alluded to, whether using such groups as instruments of foreign policy or national security, whether that is something that can be conducted in this day and age, or at some point the Pakistani state has to take a step back and realize or understand that whether they can go on rationalizing the use of such proxies and forces which backfire, which hurt. We have lost great officers. The Pakistani officer, General Sanaullah Niazi, was a wonderful officer. We have lost General Alawi, again a wonderful officer. So it is not necessarily that one is just blaming the Pakistani state for sometimes it's the wrong diagnosis, sometimes it's a bad prescription. And I think it's a question of the state to take a deep inwards look and realize whatever has been going on up until this point, whether this is something which is viable in future or not.
Maybe the final word.
Very briefly about drones. Actually, this is not the topic today, but I would like to speak about it. Drones are not state terrorism. They are not. It's not terrorism. Killing terrorists with drones. First, Pakistani civilian government and Pakistan Army have approved those. So it's cooperation between two states. Okay. First of all. Secondly, if killing Hakimullah Mahsood is terrorism, then I support that terrorism. If you think that 20 people who died with one terrorist were not terrorists, I'm sorry, tell me what the hell what they're doing with Hakimullah. You see, why do these terrorists are using human shields? They are part of the groups, so they are not terrorism. The most important thing for your point of, from your perspective should be that Pakistan, both civilians and military, approve that. Thank you.
I would commend to all of you the book, which you will find outside, and I think, as you've heard from the conversation today, does a tremendous job of tracing the evolution of a movement that we often tend to see as static, and also the global dimension of a movement that we tend to see as quite localized. So for those reasons and others, and for his tremendous remarks today, I'd ask you to join me in thanking both of the speakers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.